Each life we incarnate into has a divine purpose. For the majority of people on this planet, their purpose has eluded them. We have become so distracted with the struggle to survive that we have forgotten what we are here to do. In alignment with the sacred laws of nature, the ultimate purpose of all existence is to create and evolve. We certainly do not incarnate into life with the intention to destroy. And yet, we have come to live in a very destructive world. As a result, there are many out there who feel lost or adrift, whilst knowing deep down inside that something is very wrong with their reality. Many people wish they could do something of value, anything that is purposeful, instead of having to submit to a system of slavery in order to survive. It is important never to let go of that feeling. That is your soul crying out to you, telling you that your life has value and that you do indeed have a purpose. The most important thing you can do in life is to recognize your purpose, and often that requires a lot of soul searching. Life indeed dishes out some pretty tough challenges, which will either move you closer towards your purpose path, or will give you great training for when you finally realize what it is that you came here to do. But more often than not, the very clues about your life's purpose are hidden in plain sight, woven into the very fabric of our existence. But we are so easily distracted by irrelevant details that don't really matter, that often we miss the very obvious right in front of us. It is because of our willful ignorance of anything that does not fit our preconceived ideas that the truth about the nature of our reality is so readily hidden in plain sight. This is a very deep and personal journey, which has come to be expressed in many aspects throughout my life. This is not just an attempt to retell a bunch of research and pass it off as my own, for I am very grateful and openly acknowledge all the many wonderful people that I have been given the opportunity to work with and to learn from in order to get to the point where I've come to know what I now know. This is a journey I was always destined to go on, and likewise, how I have come to know this information forms as much a part of the story as the information itself. Hello and welcome everybody. This is Conscious Consumer Network coming to you live. My name is Mel V and this is Dragonology Season 2, Episode 8. Coming to you on the 1st of October, and the time is 9 p.m. BST. Tonight, we're going to be continuing with our theme, and it's the theme we've been kind of covering off quite a bit over the last few weeks. So if you haven't seen the previous Dragonology episodes, please go back and watch them. Season 1 from episode 1 to 13, as well as Season 2, episodes 1 through 7. It'll obviously put a lot more of this into context for you if you've already seen all of that. However, I will be recapping on some of the themes that we've covered off over the past few weeks, and obviously then drawing it into where we are going next. And it does go to some rather interesting places, as you shall see. So, continuing the theme of ritual and sacrifice, basically just to explain what the purpose of them are. Rituals and sacrifice were largely oriented around fertility and harvest cycles of nature to do with birth and death, resurrection and regeneration. Now, we spoke a bit about this last week as well, but just to make it very clear that the harvest cycles that go on, for example, which really have to do with the seasons and the course of the sun through the sky over the period of a year, it's all inextricably linked to each other. The symbolism is very interesting. Okay, for example, when the sun sort of disappears over winter, we say the sun has descended into the underworld. And very much the harvest cycles and fertility and, spring and all of that, it ties in with when the sun comes out, when summer comes and when winter comes. So yes, the harvest cycles are linked to the underworld. And this is indicated by the use of pumpkin symbolism at Halloween. And we got into Halloween a bit last week, and we shall cover some more of it off tonight because it goes to some very interesting places. And again, just talking about these cycles of the harvest and of nature, fertility, and all of that. The harvest gods is very interesting, and we spoke a bit about this previously as well. In Greek mythology, the god known as Persephone, who was supposedly the daughter of Ceres, and Ceres was also a god of nature, fertility, harvest, and all of that. Persephone was abducted into the underworld by Hades. The myth of her abduction represents her function as a personification of vegetation, which shoots forth in the spring and withdraws from the earth at harvest. Now, this is a very interesting depiction here of Persephone. You'll see rising out of the earth with wheat. Now, we spoke a lot about wheat as well last week. We'll cover wheat off again in another context this week. But interesting always to notice wrapped in serpents. The serpents, obviously, the common symbolic factor with so much of this information. Of course, just another symbol of the dragon. We've covered this off previously as well, but of course we're just tying in all the themes so that we can move forward with the next set of teachings. And of course, that is the concept of a scapegoat or a sacrificial animal in the form of a scapegoat or a scape lamb, basically. The scapegoat or the scape lamb serve an identical purpose and function, whether it's a goat or a lamb, okay? And what's interesting to notice is, I'll read this over here, it says, look, the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world, okay? So much like people used to get a goat and pretend all the sins, dump all the sins on the goat and then sacrifice it, so the lamb, okay, the Lamb of God was seen as the same thing because it took away the sins, right, of the world. So the lamb, the sacrificial lamb, the Lamb of God, performs the same function as the scapegoat. They serve an identical purpose and function. Just to get into a little bit of detail about this sort of the lamb aspect, also known as the paschal lamb. Exodus chapter 12, verse 5 says the following. The lamb must be a year old without a blemish. You may take it from either the sheep or the goat. So there can be either lamb or goat, sheep or goat. Again, we've spoken about this here where it can be a scapegoat or a scape lamb. And here referenced exactly the lamb in the context of the scapegoat who takes away the sins. Okay? And why this is interesting, I want to point all of this out here quickly. A couple of things to notice here. First off, in this depiction, obviously, we've got a halo. Now, halos are usually a depiction of several things. First off, they're symbolic of the sun, usually put around the head of a holy person, and sometimes you get the solar cross in the halo, particularly behind depictions of Jesus, okay, and that'll become relevant in a second. But look here, we've got what looks like a grail or a chalice of some sort catching the blood, okay, the holy blood that was caught in the grail. Now, where does that kind of symbolism come up? Let's have a look. they talk about the Lamb of God being, the Lamb is actually just a replacement for Son. Okay, the Son of God. And of course, Son indicated here by the halo, as in the solar sun. And of course, Jesus was a solar Messiah, as we previously spoken about. Now, the Lamb of God was seen as a sacrifice to Jehovah God, all right, Jupiter God. Now, much like the lamb or the goat was sacrificed, so too was Jesus sacrificed, okay? Supposedly in atonement for the sins of others, much like the concept of the scapegoat. So Jesus was sacrificial penance. He paid the price of what the scapegoat would have done. Okay, this is what I'm trying to really ram home here, is that Jesus was symbolic of a scapegoat. Now, you've got to get this archetype of the scapegoat down, because it comes up again and again. All right, we've spoken about this previously with the concept of Abraham sacrificing his son Isaac, except he didn't have to sacrifice Isaac. There was a ram, can be a goat or a lamb. The ram was used instead of Isaac. So again, a scapegoat, a substitution, a replacement of the votive. And that's very important to recognize, because this theme of the substitution with the lamb, or hiding of the human sacrifice behind an animal, played out in the whole Isaac and Abraham story. And it plays out too in the story of Jesus, okay, where Jesus archetypally fulfills the role of the scapegoat. Okay, and this becomes evident when you start looking at some of the depictions of the Lamb of God that you find in all sorts of places. Here, a mosaic, it's in Paredes century showing, it's a 5th century depiction showing the Lamb of Christ with obviously the solar cross behind it. And here's another one showing the Lamb slowly becoming human, yet another dragon feature, and that is being anthropomorphic, being able to change. Here we've got Lamb's body holding a cross. And this is an interesting one. This is a depiction of the Lamb multiplying loaves and fish. Okay, loaves and fishes, which obviously is a story of Jesus. But here we've got the Lamb doing that. And it shows you obviously that Christ was often depicted as the Lamb of God because he was the sacrificial lamb, the paschal lamb. Very much why they have the Passover lamb or the paschal lamb, the blood marking the doorposts. It all is referencing similar things, similar archetypes, and it's just different stories, which basically are narratives of the same thing in different time periods. Okay, so moving on a bit from what we've been covering off and moving on to some examples of these things that we can actually see in classical art, because of course the evidence is all around us. We just need to have a look, go to a local museum or a couple of churches and go have or cathedrals. Luckily in Europe we have access to some very old temples and stuff, so you can see some of these beautiful artworks. And this is a particularly beautiful one called the Ghent altarpiece, and I'm going to be referencing for now this central piece here, okay, because these are various panels. Some of them are actually painted on the back as well, on the reverse side, but this is a beautiful piece. Okay, show you this piece over here. The central piece is what we're going to be looking at close up in this. All right, now there's a number of interesting things going on here. It's very detailed. First off, of course, you've got the dove, which represents the Holy Spirit, or of course God, which we've talked about the etymology of dove and spirit, previously referencing the dragon. And then of course that's a solar symbol here, sun symbol, very interesting. But what's interesting to notice here is there's a lamb in the middle of this altar, okay? And again, the blood's coming out. You can't really see it here. I'll go on to a close-up of it, but just to take you through some of the things that are happening here. There's a lot of bowing down, reading of books, praise going on here. I'll show you a close-up of this area because that's very interesting over there. But notice the angels surrounding this particular lamb over here, which if we go close up, this is the sacrificial lamb, okay, we've already spoken about. And of course, this is from the Ghent altarpiece by Jan van Eyck, 15th century, and he was a grand master. His work is phenomenal, absolutely initiated into the mysteries. This guy knew what he was doing because there's a lot of stuff encoded into his paintings. As you can see here again, the blood pouring into the chalice, representative of the blood that will be drunk as part of blood drinking rituals. Okay, what else would it go into a cup? You drink out of a cup. And here again, you know, this sort of solar halo type thing, indicating that this is actually a solar Messiah being Jesus, all right? And the lamb is a replacement for Jesus. Now here, this particular depiction, I'll take you back to the altarpiece so you can see. It's this group of ladies in the corner, yeah? A lot of detail going on here. I want to take you through this because this is very important to look at. First off, notice there's a few things here. A sacrificial lamb, okay, as well as the first fruits in a tin. Okay, remember the basket made of twigs, which carries the first fruits, which is the sacrificial fruits. Now, tin refers to 10, and 10 is what tithes, 10% of your earnings that go to the church. All right, so that's what the tin is indicative of, carrying the first fruits. So this is a sacrifice, and this is a sacrifice. But what's also very interesting to notice the expressions on the faces of these ladies. They look very, very sad, this one and this one, because notice they're all pregnant as well, indicating sacrifice of the firstborn. All right, but of course they bring what we would call the supplemental votives, what we swap out instead, like Isaac and Abraham, the story there where they swapped it out for the ram. But you can guarantee what this is representing, these women being pregnant, is the fact that the firstborn gets sacrificed. Very interesting. That's why they look so sad. They have to give up their beautiful babies. Okay, song and laughter. Laughter and song from angels, as we've spoken about previously, is indicative of child sacrifice. Okay, in the Babylonian mysteries, it said that angels kill children by laughing at them and smiling at them. All right. So what's interesting to notice about laughter, the word laughter is only one letter short of being slaughter. Interesting that. Laughter is actually rooted in slaughter because, as we say, angels kill children by smiling or laughing at them in Babylonian mysteries, and song and laughter from angels is thus indicative of child sacrifice. This is also from a painting by Jan van Eyck. Here's a very, very interesting depiction of Gabriel. Notice Gabriel's smiling, okay, because you guarantee Gabriel's, you know, I'll go on to explain Gabriel in a second for those who don't remember from previous Dragonologies, but let's just have a look. Gabriel's always depicted in red and green, the red representing blood sacrifice, and the green we'll explain in a second. Okay, but as we've spoken about before, smiling Gabriel, notice distinctly smiling. In ancient Babylonian traditions, angels killed children by smiling at them, all right? Archangel Gabriel is always depicted in green and red. Red, of course, indicating bloodline or blood sacrifice. And of course, is wearing a crown as well, indicating royalty. As we see, Archangel Gabriel usually always depicted in green or green and red. Now, green and grin, as we talked about the smiling, okay, Gabriel. So we got green, Gabriel depicted in green. So it's green and grin. You can see how green and grin are words that are etymologically cognizant with each other. And for those of you who may remember some of this because we've been through this already, but just tying it all in, of course, grin and grim. Grim obviously not meaning something terribly happy. If someone's grim, it means they're miserable. But again, it's the same contradiction between slaughter and laughter. Yeah, you've got the same sort of thematics playing out here with grin and grim, which the words grin and grim are very similar, and they are etymologically cognizant with each other and indicative of smiling angels, or in fact the grim reaper. And of course, because it's harvest season, the Grim Reaper always has this scythe with him, or skith, whatever you call it. Anyway, the word grin, as we've spoken about previously, originates with jinn, which is an Arabic classification for dragon. Jinn obviously originally spelled with a DJ, and then the J, and then the G-I-N. And of course, the I, or the vowel sound, transliterates out both into the O and into the E, okay? So, for example, dragon, or generation, or genesis. And then, of course, we've already spoken about grin. And then the grine, the green, which is a mythological creature, supposedly. And then, of course, green, which we've already spoken about, the color that Gabriel wears, which references the green man, all right? Which Gabriel, Archangel Gabriel, and the green man are archetypes of the same vein. They're the same archetypes, just under different names in different parts of mythology, in different parts of the world. We've spoken about this tremendously, so I'll go through this rather quickly, because the other gods which are depicted as being green, for example, is Osiris, the Egyptian god, which is commonly depicted as green. And Osiris is often depicted with two ostrich feathers on either side of his head, which is why ostrich takes its name from Osiris. Al-Qadir, obviously we've spoken about Al-Qadir previously, a mystical figure described in the Quran as a servant of God possessing great wisdom and knowledge. Servant of God, angel, much? Anyway, Al-Qadir is often depicted on a fish. Jesus is sometimes depicted on a fish as well. And his head surrounded in a halo, much like Jesus. And is always depicted as dressed in green. Yeah, the common factor here being the green. And of course, in Old Arabic, there are no words for good and bad. The closest term is ripe and unripe. Unripe being the equivalent of evil, and unripe being represented as green. So that is why the green. Green's obviously representation of evil. So talking about evil, oaths and threats, okay? Oaths and veiled threats appertaining to the mysteries are centrifugal to the dragon cult's servant, initiate, or priest. And an example of this is the extreme oath of the Jesuits, which it's an oath that makes some pretty harsh threats in here. It says things, for example, I won't read out the whole thing, so I really hate this oath. But, I mean, it makes some pretty hectic threats. I'll read a threat, for example. It says, I will spare neither age, sex, or condition, and I will hang, waste, boil, flay, strangle, and bury alive these infamous heretics, rip up the stomachs and wombs of the women, and crush the infants' heads against the wall. I mean, does that sound like a threat or what? So that is a threat within an oath, okay? And these oaths and threats are absolutely centrifugal to the dragon cult initiate circles. And the threat thing becomes obvious now as we get into things, okay? The word minx. Let's talk about what a minx is. And this is very interesting. We start getting into the feminine aspect of this. The word minx refers traditionally to a pert, sly, or playful girl. Minx is a variation of the Latin adjective menaxus. Menaxasis, I beg your pardon. Menaxasis, if I can say it properly. Menaxasis, there we go, which means threatening, all right? So minx comes from the Latin word naxasis, which means threatening. Now, this brings in the archetype of the sexual predator, or the succubus, what Lilith kind of creatures that have become known. The harpies, we've discussed those in the past. They basically all fit the archetypal minx, which is equated with a sexual predator. Now, the minx is also inextricably linked with sacrifice. The word menaxasis, or minax, is derived from the Hebrew word minka, meaning to offer a sacrifice, and is indicative of the English word menace. Now, menace is very similar to the word threat. If something's a threat, it could be a menace, or if something's a menace, it could be a threat. Yeah? So it's, minka is indicative of the English word menace, and minka also means to offer a sacrifice. Beg your pardon. So minx, minax, and minka all stem from the same word root. okay, and indicate threat or menace. Now, Minka, the Minka offering is integral to eating and sexual intercourse. Of course, this is two things that are inextricably linked with ritual, is feasting, ritual feasting, and ritual sexual activity, inextricably linked with fertility rituals, because obviously in spring, if you get a good harvest, you have lots of food, so the feast will be good. Yeah. And of course, they engage in sexual rituals to increase fertility of the land and things like that. So eating and sexual intercourse are inextricably linked to the Minka offering, which is a sacrificial offering. Okay, talking about the minks again, a similar equivalent in Greek mythology would be the sirens or sirens, who were considered as dangerous or devious creatures who are often portrayed as the minx, femme fatale, or damsel in distress, who lured sailors with their enchanting music. Now, we dealt with damsels in distress last week, so please do go back and watch last week's Dragonology to catch up on this particular route. So let's have a look at some of the sirens and artifacts. Okay, here you can see, I just want to deal with what's going on in this painting first. Okay, obviously it says they used to lure sailors with their enchanting music, and you can see your damsels waving all in distress. You've got the bones of men laying around, and here's a whole bunch of sailors coming off a boat towards them, not realizing there's all dead bodies around them. The sirens. That's a very interesting depiction of the sirens. And here's some others. These are actually very old, 2,000 years old at least, artifacts of sirens. This is a mosaic, an ancient Roman mosaic. And you can see they're depicted, the sirens are actually depicted with wings, like winged beings, like angels or dragons. And here the sirens are actually depicted as bird-like beings, much like the harpies, or perhaps griffins or phoenixes. And in John William Waterhouse's depiction here, he's had two different depictions of sirens. In this particular one, they're depicted as bird-like women with bird-type heads, looking a bit like harpies, coming on board the boat. And here, they're depicted with fish-like bodies, a bit like mermaids, yeah, coming on board the boat. And it's the same artist, John William Waterhouse, who did this one and this one. Okay, talking about menace. The quintessential minx is seen as a menace, which is etymologically cognizant with menses, referencing menstruation, which is indicative of the priestess and fire star ritual. Now, we've spoken about fire star previously as well, which is basically the collection of the priestess's menstrual blood, which they obviously drink at rituals. Very powerful stuff. And menstrual cycles are usually linked to the moon as well. So usually when a priestess starts menstruating, it's linked with the moon cycles, which is why they drink the blood at certain times. And anyway, interesting stuff. Now, we're talking about menace. Obviously, menace very similar to threat, right? Now, we talked about the threats and the oaths, so this is where the threat becomes a bit more interesting. Minax, which we've spoken about, meaning threat, is cognizant with the Hebrew word minka, all right, meaning propitiation. Now let's look at the word threat for a second before I go on to what propitiation means. Eat, all right. In the word threat, we find the word eat, okay, which again references ritual feasting. We spoke about feasting and sex always inextricably linked with ritual. Feasting, sex, and sacrifice, always inextricably linked with ritual. So propitiation, okay? Propitiation is an action meant to regain someone's favor or make up for something you did wrong, which is another way of expressing sacrificial atonement, okay? Think about it, how they say man was born in original sin, which is why we spend our entire lives in sacrificial atonement by paying taxes. And I've illustrated that previously in Dragonologies as well, how that all ties into each other. But this is what propitiation is actually. It's the word for what it is that we engage in. Okay, we're constantly making up, supposedly for something we did wrong, because guess what? We're born into original sin. We did it whether we know it or not. We were wrong from birth, kind of thing. And we express sacrificial atonement by the fact that we sacrifice our sacred labor into taxes and such like. Anyway, we dealt with this word here, minka, meaning propitiation. Okay, minka is actually branched semantically with the Greek adjective mimikos, which actually means mimic. It references a mimic. And this gets into some interesting territory here, right? Because what does a priest do? A priest mimics certain motions and actions. He goes through the motions when he does a ritual or holds a service or gives a sermon. It's the same thing. When you marry someone, it's the same ritual, mimics the same things over and over again, a repetition of action. That's what mimic actually means. Now, the mimic is linked very much to another archetype, which we've spoken about in previous Dragonologies, which ties into Dragonology. That is the archetype of the Harlequin, which obviously comes out of Italian Renaissance Commedia dell'arte theatre. The archetype of the Harlequin is similar to that of the mimic, taking on a theatrical and ritual function. And notice both the mimic being masked by makeup, and here the Harlequin's also masked, and that becomes relevant in a bit. And so is the Joker masked with makeup, and so is the clown, all right? And they're extensions of the mimic and Harlequin type archetypes. We've discussed this previously as well, being the Joker and the clown. And notice, of course, how they all seem to have these sort of squared off patterns on their clothing. We've dealt with the reason for that previously as well. It's not by accident. Okay. The concept of the actress is rooted with the function performed by the priestess by performing certain rites as part of a ritual performance, usually with fertility, copulation, and sacrifice. Okay, these rituals that are performed are usually associated with fertility, copulation, and sacrifice. Now, we've dealt with this in previous Dragonologies as well, and why this ties in is because the thespian can be an actor or an actress. That's another word for an actor or an actress, is a thespian. And of course, thespian and theatre are etymologically linked with each other through the root word the. Okay, both thespian and theatre contain the root. All right, is a Greek root word referencing God, and theoi is the plural referencing gods. Okay, hence theatre is rooted in ritual veneration of the gods. That's what theatre is. Theatre is rooted in ritual. You even get taught this in school. I studied speech and drama every single year in school, and I even studied it at a college level. And every year we start off with theatre history. First thing you get taught is theatre is rooted in ritual. It's a fact. Learn it in mainstream education. So let's have a look at some ritual performers, shall we? Actors on the stage, conducting and entertaining and distracting, hoarding the cult. All right, here obviously a little satanic-looking version of ritual performers. And oh yeah, the Pope, who is also himself a ritual performer. Acting is in fact a form of mimicking, repetition, and ritual. That is what acting is, okay? Mimicking, repetition, and ritual. And of course, the definition of ritual is simply that which is done at a specific time, at a specific place, for a specific purpose. And anything that fits into that description is linked with ritual. So, for example, I'll give you some, hold on, I'll jump ahead of myself here. Let me get there. Anyway, the word minx, which we've already dealt with, is etymologically cognizant with mask, which as a verb means conceal or hide, indicative of a cult. Now, the word cult simply means that which is hidden. So conceal or hide is indicative of a cult. Okay? Now, Here's some variations of masks. Of course, we'll get into some interesting territory. And I reference the film Eyes Wide Shut many times throughout my Dragonology lectures because it is very relevant. One of the things I want to point out in this particular movie is the use of masks, of course, masking of identity. And these robes, look at them. They're kind of the halfway hooded robe. See, this is the bit that goes on top. And then there's one that goes underneath. Of course, this is the bit, the top that connects to the hood. This comes over the shoulders and ends kind of here at the elbows. And then there's something underneath, long bits here. Very distinctive design that turns up on Nicki Minaj. This is a ritual robe she's wearing. And if any of you ever saw this Grammy performance, everyone knows the Grammy performances are nothing more than a mega ritual. But she was wearing one of these type of ritual robes, which you can see here, very similar in design, okay, with a bit underneath. And of course, this ritual robe was designed by Versace, because you can see the Versace logo here. And what's very interesting is that not just anyone designs this robe, Versace of all people. And that is not by accident either. Let's have a look why. Because look at the Versace logo, all right? The Versace logo is identical to the depictions of the Gorgon Medusa, because that's what the Versace logo is. It is a depiction of the Gorgon Medusa. You can even notice from everything from the wings on the head, which are depicted here, to the serpents wrapping around the neck, which is depicted here, okay? The Versace logo is a depiction of the Gorgon Medusa. So even fashion and cosmetics industry is rooted in cultism, very much so. And this becomes more obvious as we carry on. Now, face painting, okay? A seemingly harmless expression, much beloved by children and adults alike. The art of face painting and makeup originated in theater as an extension of the purpose created by the use of masks. And you can see here how this would, for example, be a mask, little cat-like mask, which is actually painted onto the face as opposed to being something that you could remove from the face. But essentially it was performing the same sort of function, which was to accentuate features for theatrical purposes. Okay, here's some more examples of face painting or face makeup for, I'd say, pretty theatrical purposes. Here's some more pretty theatrical face makeup. We dealt a bit with the Santa Muerte makeup last week. So this covers a bit of last week's territory as well. And of course then fashion makeup, which is the evolution of that. And of course, makeup and minks, yeah? It's very closely linked. Think of sexual predators or someone who you know is a sexual predator. They'd probably be someone who's prone to using quite a lot of makeup. Think about it. Anyway. This is obviously another variation on use of makeup is for the purposes of war paint. And of course, war is a sacrificial ritual. We've spoken about this quite a bit as well in previous Dragonologies. Now, dressing up and putting makeup on and doing all that sort of thing at Halloween, okay, this is very interesting. The tradition of dressing up is rooted in the ritual masking of identity with costumes, masks, and makeup. Much like they mask their identity here, okay, in these rituals by putting on robes and masks. So that's what the purpose of getting dressed up and putting makeup on and stuff at Halloween is all about, all right? It's the ritual masking of identity with costumes, masks, and makeup in order to fulfill or perform a specific role, all right, as one would do in a ritual or theatrical play. So for one night, you become a witch, you become that character, you know, you put on the hat and you run around and, you know, you absolutely, I've always enjoyed fancy dress parties because I find it really breaks the ice. You find people suddenly, you know, come out of their shells and, yeah, anyway. So the concept of trick-or-treating, let's have a look at that. What is that all about, okay? Because this is obviously something that's linked with Halloween, which is just around the corner as well. And of course, Halloween is inevitably and inextricably linked with harvest festivals and of course the underworld. So trick or treat Trick-or-treating is a customary practice for children in many countries. Children dress up in costumes and travel from house to house in order to ask for treats such as candy or money with the phrase trick or treat. The trick part refers to the usually idle threat to perform mischief on the homeowner or their property if no treat is given to them. That's interesting. Okay, now let's have a look at the word treat. Okay, the word treat contains a root word eat, indicative of ritual feasting. Okay, so the treat is actually indicative of the sacrificial votive, anything that's eaten, the sacrifice. All right, got the word eat in treat for a reason. Now, threat and treat. The words threat and treat are very similar. They are, in fact, etymologically cognizant with each other with only one letter difference, okay? But what's interesting to notice is that also both contain the root word eat. We've dealt with threat already. And why that now ties in, because threat has the root word eat, much like treat has the root word eat. And of course, the word eat is indicative of sacrificial ritual feasting. We've dealt with this as well before, but just to tie this in, the tradition of Christmas gifts, the traditional ritual of treats is further extended by the customary giving and receiving of gifts, okay, which is symbolic of which is a symbolic representation of sacrificial penance. And again, the wrapping of gifts indicates a hidden votive, the hidden sacrifice, all right? The concealment, we dealt about this, concealing, like they do the carver stone, they cover it. So we wrap the gifts, the concealment, the hidden votive, the hidden sacrifice. And this is further extended in other ways. We'll show you in a minute how that works. But again, gifts are given when Valentine's Day, ritual gifts indicative of sacrificial votives are given. Birthdays and other ritual traditions which are celebrated. Now, the cake is very interesting because you'll find that quite often at these ritual celebrations, birthdays, parties, Christmas, there'll be a tradition of baking a cake and eating a cake, okay? And the tradition of baking and or eating of the cake is symbolic of ritual feasting. Cake, much like bread, is traditionally made with wheat and is symbolically representative of human flesh or the body, obtained from a sacrifice. Now remember, what we talk about the covering, okay? The covering, whether it be the covering of the carver stone in Mecca, or whether it be the wrapping of gifts, okay? So we do the same thing to the cake, all right? The tradition of frosting or icing a cake is comparative with the symbolic implications of gift wrapping or wrapping of gifts. Frosting and icing of a cake is indicative of ritual concealment, okay, which of course is then in turn indicative of the occult. And the word occult simply means that which is hidden, all right, and you hide the cake under the icing. You conceal it, you cover it with icing and frosting. So you see why they do that. And of course, from last week's Dragonology, you may remember wheat, which is what bread and cake is made out of. The word wheat contains the root word eat. Again, another one with the root word eat. It's not by accident because the word eat is indicative of sacrificial feasting. And of course, we've got Virgo, the Virgin, carrying the wheat sheaves, and Virgo normally comes out at harvest time. Yeah, we dealt with that last week too. Now, of course, wheat and bread and a cake represents the body of Christ. And this is actually told to us in the Bible. This is my body, okay? The bread. So it's not just me making it up saying that cake and bread represent human flesh and body. This is commonly known as a fact. In fact, there's a tradition of the in Catholic churches and Christian churches called the Eucharist, where you eat bread and you drink wine, representing the body and blood of Christ. So this is commonly known that wheat-based substances such as bread, which is similar to cake, are used. And this is why we have cakes at rituals, okay? Anywhere where we make a cake, it's normally because it's a ritual celebration. We don't know that, of course. We don't associate it with rituals, but this is what it's all about. And of course, the icing of the cake references ritual concealment, much like gifts. Interesting, isn't it? All ties into each other. Okay. So just back to the concept of trick-or-treating, okay? The concept of trick-or-treating represents a payment or a sacrificial penance in the form of a treat that is sought by dark entities represented by costumed children. Now, this gets into interesting territory because what you've got is little children dressing up, for example, like a devil and going and demanding a treat under threat, supposedly an idle threat, but it is still under threat. Okay, trick or treat, that's what the trick part is all about. So it's, demanding some form of payment, some form of sacrificial penance. You have to give up that treat to the child. So it is a form of tax, a form of sacrifice that you give as a treat that is demanded under threat by children dressed in costumes which represent dark entities. Okay, generally, most of the Halloween costumes have got somewhat of a sinister nature to them, don't they? So you've got to look at what is being represented here. What are the allegories? What is those all symbolic of? Okay, there's always a purpose and a function to everything. Under the illusion of festive fun, children are engaged in mimicking dark occultic archetypes in order to request, demand, payment under threat. Now, where have we come across this theme before? Okay, we've spoken about this a lot, and this is indicative of the supposed deal with the devil. All right, we'll get into this a little bit more in a bit. But across the world, there is tradition of dressing up in costume for street parades and carnivals. Now, I lived in London for 10 years, and I lived in Notting Hill for a number of those. And I used to go to the Notting Hill Carnival, which was the last weekend of summer, supposedly, the last long bank holiday weekend of August. And it's like 1 million people descend to the street dressed up in all sorts of dancing, feathers, glitter. It's insane, really, an amazing spectacle. I think it's the biggest street festival in the Northern Hemisphere. But anyway, Carnival is an absolute landmark event in London. Everybody goes. And what's interesting to note, the root of the word carnival, because everyone gets dressed up in costume for carnival, especially the street performers, the ritual performers, okay? The word carnival and carnivore are etymologically cognizant. They're very similar, aren't they? And a carnivore references a meat eater, indicative of ritual feasting on sacrifice, okay? This is interesting, not just eating, meat eating. That's what carnivore means. Very interesting, that. So theme of eating keeps coming back, sacrificial eating, feasting, possibly of babies and what else. Okay, now celebrations, festivals, and parties are all pretty much linked to the same thing, which is ritual. Ritual celebrations, which include dressing up, often take the form of a party. As I said earlier, people sometimes go to fancy dress parties where everybody dresses up. And it's very ritually based, yeah? Even the word party is rooted in the very common dragon root word group, which we've discussed quite frequently, being para, pala, pio, all right, where you get the words such as palace, pharaoh, some very interesting ones. And pala is actually a Sanskrit word for a serpent-like god or deity. So, that's where party, all right, is rooted in the para, pala, pio group of dragon root words. Now, we're talking about, obviously, dress-ups and stuff, and that just doesn't necessarily pertain to parties and celebrations, okay? Priests and popes, and even when you go get dressed for a wedding, everyone ritualistically puts on the white gown, and it's a ritual. You wear the white gown, it's part of the tradition, tradition being another word for ritual, basically. And traditionally, what you find is people in the army are dressed like this, in camouflage, and people in the police force, particularly in England, are dressed like this. Note the tessellated stripe around the hat, which shows you who they really work for. But anyway, so uniforms are also ritual vestments, ritual dress-up garments. Now, remember what we said about rituals, okay? Ritual, and what defines a ritual? That which is done in a specific place for a specific purpose at a specific time, okay? So any garment which is worn for a specific purpose at a specific place at a specific time is ritualistically worn, okay? It's a ritual garment. So ritual vestments are worn for specific purposes by, for example, judges, barristers, or, as we have here, the Pope in his purple garment representing the Porphyro Gentius. Here again, more examples of people costumed for ritual, satanic ritual costume, and of course our beloved Ku Klux Klan, who are actually controlled by the Roman Catholic Church and like to burn people who have slightly more melanin in their skin than perhaps us Europeans. Rather sad. Notice again the masking, the ritual masking, okay? Masking is very important. Now we move into things which take it into a more modern and sort of contemporary context, okay? Drawing this all into, I suppose, a final point of let's bring this into a practical reality. The law of contract. By agreeing to give a treat at Halloween, you are unknowingly paying penance for a contract that you did not or unknowingly entered into. By agreeing to pay the price or the treat, you unknowingly consent to the terms of the contract. Now, what are the terms of this contract? Perhaps your soul? Is the treat some kind of consideration? Is it some kind of substitutional sacrificial votive? Okay, like the lamb is a substitutional sacrificial votive in both the Isaac and Abraham story, as well as with regards to Jesus. All right, think about this. The allegory is very obvious. By agreeing to give a treat at Halloween, you are unknowingly paying penance for a contract that you did not or unknowingly entered into. By agreeing to pay the price or the treat, you are unknowingly consenting to the terms of a contract that you do not know about. And this is where soul harvesting comes in, okay? The concept of the Grim Reaper, for example, is indicative of of cultic soul harvesting, okay? This is a cult icon which basically represents the function as a reaper of souls. Because think about it, if anyone's ever seen that movie, Meet Joe Black, right? I think it was Anthony Hopkins and Brad Pitt, where Brad Pitt plays the Grim Reaper, who basically comes to take Anthony Hopkins' soul, but he doesn't look anything like the skeletal guy here. But basically, that is the concept of the Grim Reaper, is a reaper of souls, a harvester of souls. Here the term harvest comes back again, okay? This is how it links to the underworld. Through a harvesting of souls, the souls get harvested and taken to the underworld by the Grim Reaper, for example. And this is why he carries a harvesting tool, which is the scythe that he has over here. Now, soul harvest cult worship, we've dealt with this last week as well, with the feminine version of this being Santa Muerta, who's also often depicted with the same harvesting tool, yeah? And of course, her holiday is the 1st of November, All Saints' Day, or the Day of the Dead. And Halloween is All Saints' Eve, which is the night of the 31st of October. So it all links into each other, you see. Now, this is very interesting, okay? Because another version of the soul harvested type character, much like, for example, the Grim Reaper, would be the ferryman, okay? Who's known in Greek mythology as Charon, who is the ferryman of Hades and carries souls across the river Styx in Acheron, which is a river that divides the living world from the dead. And of course, we've dealt a lot with the ship etymology and how that references basically the royal angelic bloodlines. But the word fairy is also etymologically cognizant with fairy, which is another winged being, winged deity, much like angels and dragons, because they are in fact the same thing. We've dealt with this a lot. Now, there's a really odd tradition that goes with this, which ties into everything, taxation and contracting. Now, remember, the moment you give money to somebody for something, okay, you're entering into a commercial contract with them. All right, so you enter into a contract with them. Now, here's an interesting tradition of coins are placed on the eyes of a dead person to pay the ferryman. This is a tradition quite common in Ireland and England, where they place coins on the eyes, okay, of dead people to pay the ferryman. But the moment you pay someone something, you enter into a contract with them. What contract are you entering into? Are you unknowingly entering into a contract where you give your soul to the devil? All right, because this is what this is symbolic of. All right, the moment you pay money, you enter into a contract. Well, the coins are placed there to pay somebody. Okay, they're there to pay the ferryman. So you're entering into a commercial contract with the ferryman. What are the terms of that contract? You do not know. Yeah, and this is the interesting thing. Very interesting, very relevant symbolism, and it actually teaches you a lot about the way things work on a day-to-day level with regards to things like death and taxes, okay? And this very apt saying by Benjamin Franklin, in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes, all right? Because effectively, this is a tax. You're paying a tax to the ferryman after you're dead as well, supposedly. After you're dead, you still have to pay a tax to the ferryman to transport your soul, okay? And when you agree to pay something, again, you're entering into a commercial contract. What are the terms of this contract? Do you know? Is the term, are the terms for your immortal soul? And when you're dealing at this level, you can never be too sure, because this whole contracts thing is very pernicious, okay? And it works with a lot of assumption, and it works on the basis that most of us are ignorant and don't really know what we're doing, okay? Anyway, the concept of a contract is illustrated, unknowing contract is illustrated through the concept of the birth certificate. In fact, birth certificates are nothing more than contracts which issue tradable, which issue tradable shares against our value. Okay, so birth certificates are nothing more than contracts which issue tradable shares against our value. This contract was entered into without our consent and therefore is dishonorable and fraudulent. Okay, any contract that is entered into without your consent is dishonorable and fraudulent. Now, again, tying in this whole concept of contracts for our souls, the contracting of one's immortal soul in return for fame and fortune is a form of sacrificial penance in return for assistance from the dark side, devil, dragons, angels, supernatural beings, gods, whatever you want to call them, okay? And this is done more often unknowingly than knowingly so, all right? They say you have to do it by free will, but often people are tricked into these things. And anybody who's kind of familiar with Steve Richards and his work on holographic kinetics, it's very easy to have an entity attach themselves to you life after life after life if you enter into a contract with them. So this is not to be messed with, folks. Seriously, know what you're doing when you're entering into contracts. So please do make good contracts and honor them. All right, there's always a price to pay for dishonorable contracts. And over here, I've got keep calm and don't pay the ferryman. Because the minute you agree to enter into that contract, okay, by paying them, all right, there is conditions to that contract that you may be unaware of. Don't forget, the ferryman takes you to Hades, which is supposedly hell. Yeah? Why would you pay him to take you there? Think about this. Money changing hands. Every time you spend money with another party, you enter into a commercial contract with another party. Make sure you know and comprehend the terms and conditions of contract prior to engaging in anything that is harmful, causes loss, or impedes freedom. And I do apologize for my spelling tonight, folks. And this is where it brings us round full circle to what we're all about here at Conscious Consumer Network, and that is to be a conscious consumer. The power we and our consumer currency has should not be underestimated and should be used responsibly and consciously in the pursuit of a fair, just, peaceful, sustainable world. And that's it for us tonight, folks. If you've missed anything, feel free to go and catch up. We have all of season 1 obviously archived, as well as episodes 1 through 7 of season 2 of Dragonology. So if you haven't missed anything, do go check it out. It all makes much more sense when you've been following along. If this is your first time watching Dragonology, we hope you enjoyed this episode, and we hope you do carry on watching as we go through this season. If you did miss anything, however, you're welcome to download a high-definition version of your favorite shows, of this and any other Conscious Consumer Network show from Market. All shows are available in high definition at effiemarket.com. And of course, all shows are listed in the broadcast guide, which is updated weekly. So please do go to our website and check out the broadcast guide to see what other shows there are. And our broadcast guide is available on consciousconsumernetwork.tv on the homepage, so please do pop there. And coming up after this, we've got Mind Vault with Ava Shriver-Dunn and Kevin Dunn, so please don't go anywhere. Stay tuned. It is turning out to be one of my favorite shows here on Conscious Consumer Network, and we have many more interesting shows, so do go check out our broadcast guide to see when they're showing and mark that in your diary. Okay, there is a need for us to renew our broadcast license for 2016. We've got 3 months left of this year to raise $60,000, which is the budget we need to run Conscious Consumer Network for 2016. $60,000 is a fraction of the cost of comparative mainstream media networks who go through this kind of budget in a morning. This is what we need to run for a year. Guys, this network belongs to you. Information is the common heritage of all beings. We do not claim ownership over any of this information. We do this because we love you all, and we believe ultimately there's great potential in humanity. But we cannot change the world unless we first change the media. So please help us to keep Conscious Consumer Network on the air for 2016. Go to our website, consciousconsumernetwork.tv, click on the donate button, make a donation, give what you can, and support our network support fund and help keep us here. We love doing this for you. It's a lot of hard work, but you know what? As I said, we do this because we love you all. We only have 3 months left of 2015, so please help keep CCN on the air for 2016. There's a lot of people who would be very disappointed if we weren't there, and we certainly would like the opportunity to reach the huge amount of people that we have been reaching, because 2015 really has been the year of CCN. And that's it for us, folks. As always, we thank you for supporting free and independent media, and we will see you next week, same time.